They said she was the only woman the crown prince ever truly loved. They also said she was the only one he ever killed. When the palace guards found her body near the marble fountain, her wrist still clutching a single white rose, the official story spread faster than the desert wind. A tragic accident, a fainting spell, the unfortunate fall of a private tutor. But those who worked inside the palace, those who heard the shouting before the silence, told another story. They called it what it was: murder. Her name was Noor Rahman, 24. Born in Sharjah, educated in London, hired to teach English and etiquette to the youngest princess of the Al Mansour dynasty. She was bright, graceful, and far too beautiful to be invisible in a palace that worshipped appearances. She arrived 2 months after the wedding of Crown Prince Amir al-Mansour, the man whose face graced every newspaper, whose smile promised modernity, and whose heart belonged to no one, at least not yet. The palace was the kind of place where silence was currency. Every servant learned to walk without footsteps, to speak without words. Cameras hung like insects in the corners, and laughter was rationed. Noor noticed that from the first day. She also noticed something else: the loneliness that followed the prince like a shadow. It was during her 3rd week that she met him properly. She was leaving the library after tutoring his sister, a quiet 12-year-old who adored poetry. Noor carried a stack of books so high she could barely see ahead of her. She turned the corner, collided with someone, and everything fell. Books scattered, papers flew, and the man she had crashed into crouched to help her. When she looked up, she froze. It was him, Amir al-Mansour, heir to the throne, husband to Lady Samira Khalaf, and the most photographed man in the country. He smiled, polite, distant. "I should watch where I'm going," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind that carried authority without trying. She stammered an apology. He handed her a book and paused. "Milton?" he asked, glancing at the cover. "Paradise Lost?" She nodded. He smiled again, softer this time. "Appropriate reading for this place." Then he left. That should have been the end of it. But that night she found a copy of Paradise Lost placed on her desk. Old, worn, but with a note tucked inside. Only 2 words were written, page 47. She hesitated before opening it. The passage was underlined in neat black ink. "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." She read it twice before realizing what it meant. He was telling her something. The next evening, she found him again, this time in the garden where the fountain sang softly under the moon. He stood beside it, alone, his jacket folded neatly over the railing. He didn't turn when she approached. "You read it?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He looked up at in the sky. "It's strange, isn't it? How even paradise can feel like a prison." She didn't know how to answer that. She only knew that she had never seen sadness look so controlled. From then on, he found reasons to speak to her. Questions about his sister's studies, comments on books, brief encounters that became longer with each passing week. And with every word, every glance, Noor's walls began to crumble. By the 2nd month, their meetings had turned secret. Late nights in the West Garden, where the cameras didn't reach. He would come dressed in plain clothes, his face hidden beneath a cap. She would bring tea, trembling with both fear and longing. He spoke about his marriage, about how it had been arranged, about how Lady Samira smiled for the press and ignored him in private. He spoke of duty, of expectation, of the suffocating weight of a crown that was already tightening around his throat. And Noor listened, knowing she was already falling into something she could not survive. The first time he touched her hand, she didn't pull away. The first time he kissed her, she forgot the world existed beyond the palace walls. It should have been a love story. But in palaces, love stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with statements, cover-ups, and funerals. Rumors began quietly. Servants who noticed the missing hours. The Queen Mother's aide who caught Noor leaving the West Wing after midnight. A perfume bottle left on the prince's desk. A scarf found in his chambers. It reached Samira, the wife, and once a secret reaches a woman like her, it ceases to be a secret at all. She confronted Noor one afternoon in the private study. The air smelled of incense and cold fury. Samira closed the door herself, walked toward the young tutor, and smiled. "I know who you are," she said, "and I know what you've done." Noor tried to speak, but Samira lifted a hand. "Don't. You'll only make it worse." There was no shouting, no violence, not then. Just a quiet exchange of words that would later echo like gunfire. Samira offered her a choice: resign and disappear quietly, or stay and destroy everything she had. Noor agreed to leave. That was on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, she was dead. They found her by the fountain before dawn, her skin pale, her pulse gone. The rose in her hand was from the palace garden, the same kind the prince had given her during their last meeting. The official report said heart failure. The body was buried within 24 hours. The palace released a statement expressing deep sorrow at the loss of a valued employee. But the guards whispered about the argument they had overheard hours before, about the broken vase in the prince's chambers, about the sound of footsteps running through the hall, and about the scream that came just before everything went quiet. The prince didn't attend her burial. He didn't speak for days. When he finally emerged, he looked like a ghost wearing royal clothes. 3 months later, Lady Samira left the country for health reasons. 2 years later, the fountain where Noor's body had been found was destroyed during a renovation project. But some stories can't be buried with marble. Visitors say that on certain nights when the palace lights go out and the wind moves through the courtyard, you can still hear her voice, soft, pleading, unfinished. They say the prince hears it too, and every time it calls his name, he answers. Years passed before anyone dared speak her name again. The palace changed guards, changed gardens, changed even the walls that had once carried the echo of her laughter. But it could not change what it had done. When Noor Rahman died, the official story lasted exactly 1 week before the first doubts appeared. There were questions about the timing, the bruises, the way the death was hushed, but every question met the same wall: silence. Files went missing, witnesses were reassigned, and a new fountain was built where the old one had stood. The royal family moved forward, as they always did, except one person didn't. His name was Rafi Haddad, a reporter for a small Dubai newspaper that covered business gossip more than politics. He had written a short piece about Noor's death back then, only 3 paragraphs long, buried beneath a headline about oil prices. But something about the case had refused to leave him. Maybe it was her face, the photograph used for the obituary, soft eyes that looked both frightened and brave. Maybe it was the contradictions. A healthy young woman dying suddenly, a palace closing its gates, a prince vanishing from public life for months. Rafi tried to forget. He couldn't. 7 years later, he found himself sitting in a coffee shop near the Old District, reading a short article about the upcoming anniversary of the Crown Prince's coronation. The photo of Amir al-Mansur still showed the same perfect smile. Next to him stood Lady Samira, untouched by time, elegance carved into composure, and behind them, barely visible in the frame, the garden, the new fountain. Rafi felt something twist inside him. That night, he reopened his old notebook, the one where he kept unfinished stories. Noor Rahman's name was still written across the top of one page, underlined twice. He decided to try again. At first, no one wanted to talk. The palace staff had changed. Most of those who had worked there were gone. Those who remained refused to be quoted. But Dubai was a city built on whispers, and eventually one of them reached him. A retired gardener, living quietly in Sharjah, agreed to meet. They sat by the sea, away from microphones and cameras. The man's hands trembled as he spoke. "I remember that night," he said. There was shouting, a woman's voice, then a crash. I saw the prince come out, his shirt torn, his face. I'd never seen him like that. They told us to say nothing. Rafi leaned forward. And the body? They took it before sunrise, buried her quick. No family, no funeral. Just gone. The gardener wouldn't say more. He left before Rafi could ask another question. Over the next few weeks, the journalists traced every piece of what was left. Hospital records, court archives, embassy notes. All sealed, all missing. Only one file remained accessible. A document from the education department confirming Noor's employment at the palace and her date of termination. It was dated 1 day before her death. Rafi stared at the paper for a long time. Then he looked at the address listed under next of kin, an aunt, living in Al Ain. He drove there the next morning. The house was small, quiet, and surrounded by old rose bushes. The woman who answered the door recognized Noor's name immediately. "She was my brother's daughter," she said. "They told us she died of heart failure, sent money, told us not to ask. Did you believe them?" The woman smiled faintly. "Belief doesn't change the dead." Raffi asked for a photograph, something to accompany the story he was planning to write. The aunt hesitated, then went inside and returned with a small picture wrapped in tissue paper. Noor, younger, smiling, a white rose tucked behind her ear. "She loved flowers," the woman said, "especially white roses, said they reminded her that even beautiful things can bleed." Raffi thanked her and left. That night, he wrote the first draft of his article. It began simply. 7 years ago, a teacher entered a palace and never walked out alive. He didn't publish it. Something about the way the lights flickered in his apartment made him pause. When he checked his phone, he saw a message from an unknown number. "Stop asking about her, for your safety." He deleted the message, but it came again the next night, this time with a photograph attached. A picture of his car parked outside his building. He didn't sleep. By morning, he'd made a decision. If someone wanted him silent, it meant the story was real. And if it was real, it had to be told. He went back to the palace, not through the front gates, but through the service road used by deliveries. He told the guards he was there for a maintenance inspection. Years of reporting had taught him how to look like he belonged. The palace had changed, but the air hadn't. It still smelled faintly of jasmine and fear. He walked through the garden until he found it, the fountain, new marble over old secrets. He stood there for a long time, imagining the scene the way the gardener had described it, the shouting, the crash, the silence that followed. Something caught his eye. At the base of the fountain, just above the water line, was a faint line of engraving, almost erased by time. He knelt closer and traced it with his finger. 4 words, shallow but clear enough to read, "For what was lost." He took a picture. Later, as he left the grounds, he saw a woman watching from an upstairs window. For a second, he thought he recognized her. Lady Samira. She hadn't aged, but her eyes looked tired, almost frightened. Their gaze met briefly before the curtain fell. 2 days later, Raffi received another message. No words, just the image he had taken of the engraving. It had been sent from his own number. That night, someone followed him home. He didn't see the face, just the reflection of a figure in a parked car across the street. He drove around the block twice, the headlights trailing him like ghosts. When he got back to his apartment, he found the door unlocked. Nothing was taken, but a single white rose lay on his desk. He laughed quietly, more out of disbelief than fear. Then he closed the door, locked it twice, and began to write again. He started the new draft with a single sentence. "Every palace hides a grave." Raffi stopped sleeping. He'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every word, every sound, every glance from the past few days. The white rose on his desk had started to dry, its petals curling inward like a secret refusing to die. By the 3rd night, he couldn't take the silence. He reopened his laptop and pulled up every file he'd saved about the case. Noor's employment forms, the gardener's statement, the photo of the fountain, the message that said, "For your safety." And then he noticed something strange. In the image metadata of the fountain photograph, the timestamp had changed. It was now marked as taken 2 days before he'd actually gone there. He frowned, checked again. It wasn't a glitch. Someone had accessed it, edited it, and re-uploaded it onto his device. Whoever was watching him wasn't just close, they were inside his world. He decided to leave the country for a few days, to think, to breathe. He packed a bag, shut down his phone, and booked a quiet flight to Muscat. But the night before he was meant to go, there was a knock at his door. He froze. The clock read 11:47 p.m. He waited, but the knock came again, soft, deliberate, patient. When he opened the door, a woman stood there in a dark veil, face half covered. She didn't speak, just held out an envelope. Inside it was a small USB drive and a single note written in precise handwriting. "If you really want to know what happened to Noor, watch this. But once you do, there's no turning back." Before he could ask anything, she turned and disappeared down the stairwell. Raffi locked the door and slid the USB into his laptop. For a moment, the screen flickered, then a folder opened. One video file, no label. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, black and white, from an old surveillance camera. He recognized the palace corridors, the marble floors, the arches. The timestamp read the night Noor died. At first there was nothing, just an empty hallway. Then a door opened. Noor stepped out, her face pale, her movements frantic. She looked behind her once, then began walking quickly toward the garden. Seconds later, another figure emerged from the same door. The prince. Amir caught up to her. He said something Rafi couldn't hear. Noor shook her head and tried to walk away. He grabbed her arm. She turned, shouting. He stepped closer, his hand tightening. She tried to pull free. He shoved her back. She stumbled, fell. The footage skipped for a few seconds. When it returned, she was on the ground. The prince knelt beside her, panicked, trying to lift her, shouting for help. Guards appeared. The camera cut off. Rafi leaned back, heart pounding. It wasn't cold-blooded murder, at least not in the way he had imagined. It looked like an accident. A moment of rage, a push too hard, a fall too fast. But the cover-up, the silence, that was deliberate. He replayed the video, watching the prince's face. There was horror there, yes, but also something else. Guilt that didn't fade. He closed the laptop. For a long time, he just sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, to his own breath. When he finally stood, he knew what he had to do. He would publish everything. He called his editor early the next morning. "I'm sending you something big," he said, "and if you don't hear from me by noon, publish it without me." He uploaded the file, attached his notes, and hit send. Then he waited. By 11:45, there was still no response. He tried calling. No answer. At 11:50, the power in his apartment went out. He moved to the window. The street below was empty. Too empty. He backed away, turned toward his desk, and froze. The white rose was gone. In its place lay a folded note. "This is your final warning." He ran. Down the stairs, through the alley, into the sunlight that suddenly felt too bright. He didn't stop until he reached a crowded market, the noise of people drowning out the panic in his chest. He bought a cheap phone, found a cafe with free Wi-Fi, and checked the news. Nothing, no article, no leak. His editor hadn't published it. He tried to call again, but the line went straight to voicemail. Later that evening, a headline did appear online, small, buried on a local site. "Journalist missing after alleged break-in." There was a photo of his apartment, broken glass, blood on the floor. Rafi closed the phone slowly. He was alive, but the message was clear. Someone had erased him before the story could breathe. He crossed the border that night, disappearing into Oman with only a backpack and a copy of Noor's photograph. He didn't stop moving for days. When he finally did, it was in a small coastal town where no one knew his name. He rented a room overlooking the sea. Each night, he sat on the balcony listening to the water. Sometimes he thought he could still hear her voice in the waves. 3 months later, an anonymous account posted the video online. No caption, no explanation. Within hours, it spread. The footage of the prince, the push, the fall, it was everywhere. The palace denied its authenticity, said it was fabricated, said the footage was old, manipulated, but denial couldn't stop the fire once it started. The crown prince made no public appearances for weeks. When he finally did, his eyes were hollow. He looked thinner, older, haunted. And in the background of one photograph taken that day, a small detail escaped notice by most, but not by everyone. A single white rose pinned to his suit. No one knows who placed it there, but those who followed the story know what it meant. A promise, a confession, and a memory that refused to die. A year after the video surfaced, Dubai moved on, or pretended to. The royal family tightened its circle, cut off journalists, and flooded the internet with new stories about humanitarian projects and international investments. The video was declared AI manipulated, the footage deepfake propaganda. Within weeks, search results were scrubbed clean. The story died online, but the city had seen it, the world had seen it. And no matter how many times it was deleted, the truth stayed alive in whispers. Rafi lived quietly by the sea, waiting. He never used his real name, never stayed in one place too long. He'd changed his phone 3 times, moved apartments twice. But sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, he'd still check the news. Nothing ever came of the investigation, if there even was one. Then one morning, his neighbor, a fisherman who sold his catch to tourists, handed him an envelope. "For you," he said, "no return address." Inside was a photograph. The prince walking through a hospital corridor, head down, flanked by guards, his expression unreadable. On the back of the photograph were 3 words: "He's losing everything." 2 days later, Raffi received another message, this time an email from an unknown account. It contained a single line: "Meet me where it began." Attached was a ticket to Dubai. He shouldn't have gone. He knew that. But curiosity, the same thing that had driven him this far, pulled him back. He flew into the city under a different name and checked into a hotel near the old district. That night, he went to the palace gates. It looked the same, too perfect, too silent, too guarded. The garden had been rebuilt again. The fountain was gone this time, replaced by a sculpture of abstract glass that shimmered under the lights. Beauty, as always, had replaced memory. Someone was waiting for him there, a woman. He recognized her immediately, though he had only ever seen her in photographs. Lady Samira. She wore black, no jewelry, no veil. Her eyes looked tired, her voice low. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "You sent the message," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded. "You think you know what happened, but you don't." Raffi said nothing. She looked past him, toward the garden. "He didn't mean to." "Kill her," she said. He loved her. He loved her so much that he forgot who he was supposed to be. And when she tried to leave, he panicked. She fell. He tried to save her. He couldn't. Raffi studied her. "Then why the cover-up?" She smiled sadly. "Because love isn't the scandal. Weakness is." She turned to leave, but stopped. "He's in Switzerland now. Treatment. Guilt eats slower than poison." Then she walked away. Raffi stood there, watching her disappear into the night. He didn't chase her. He didn't need to. The story was over. At least, it should have been. He returned to his hotel and sat by the window until sunrise. He thought about Noor, about the prince, about the way love, when hidden too long, turns into something sharp enough to cut through even the thickest armor of power. He opened his laptop and began to write again. Not for a paper this time, but for himself. He wrote about Noor's smile, about the way her story had been erased, about how truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. It only needs to survive. He finished the final line just as the morning call to prayer echoed through the city. He closed the laptop and went downstairs for coffee. When he returned, his room door was ajar. Inside, everything looked the same, except for one thing. On the desk where his laptop had been sat a single white rose. No note this time, no message, just the flower, fresh and still wet, as though it had been taken straight from the palace garden. Raffi smiled faintly. It wasn't fear this time. It was understanding. Some stories don't belong to the living anymore. They belong to the echoes they leave behind. He left the rose on the table and walked out. No luggage, no goodbye. 2 days later, a final post appeared online from his old abandoned blog. No one knew who uploaded it. The title read simply, "The Palace That Buried Love." It contained his entire account, every document, every recording, every photograph. And one final paragraph. "Love can be silenced. Lies can be built into marble. But guilt always finds a way to speak." The post went viral within hours. It was shared, copied, mirrored. The palace denied it again. But denial was pointless. The image of the fountain, the phrase, "for what was lost," and the white rose became symbols across the city. Artists painted them on walls. Poets wrote about them. Lovers left roses by fountains, a quiet act of rebellion. No one ever found Raffi again. Some said he fled, others said he was silenced. But sometimes, when night falls over Dubai and the desert wind carries the scent of jasmine, people swear they can hear 2 voices whispering through the dunes, one asking for forgiveness, the other finally granting it. And somewhere, deep beneath the new palace garden, where the fountain once stood, the water still runs, soft, unending, as if it remembers, because stories like theirs never die. They linger, they haunt, they whisper.